Michael D. O'Brien is one of the most well-known now living Catholic novelists. His breakthrough novel was Father Elijah, the 1996 apocalyptic tale of a Carmelite friar struggling against the forces of the Antichrist. However, already from 1976, he had been a full-time artist. There is a growing number of scholarly works on his novels, while his art has not received the same attention. In 2019, Ignatius Press published a book with many examples of his way of painting. In this video, I will give you, in the same way, some glimpses into the visual imagination of O'Brien and offer some comments. In his teens, things seemed to go in a completely different direction for Michael O'Brien when he returned to Ottawa in 1964 after living for 3 years in the Canadian Arctic. He felt a strong cultural dislocation coming from the wilderness, a simple natural life, to that of the city. As so many others at that time, he lost his faith. He began to read French existentialist works and developed an interest in alternative spiritualities before having a momentous reconversion experience. After one night of intense spiritual battle against an unseen evil force, he returned to his childhood Catholic faith. He began to draw and then also to paint, primarily nature motifs. At the age of 23, that is in 1971, he had a very successful exhibition in Ottawa, but instead of using this as a first stepping stone for a career, he left for a train ride across Canada using up the money from the exhibition and ended up eventually in Blue River, a small village in the mountains of British Columbia. There he helped a Catholic mission by doing various forms of manual labor. In a sense, he was a Christian hippie, living in a small shed in the wilderness, but not doing any art. It was after marrying and working as a weather observer that he made the momentous decision in 1976 to devote his entire life, and his family with it, to Christian sacred art. He put his brushes under the altar in the small church of Blue River and prayed for help. What happened after this is significant. He sat in his studio, which was another shed, but he could not paint anything. This creative block went on for 3 weeks, because what pictorial language should he use? Should he invent one of his own or go into an established tradition? But what might that be in the middle of the 1970s? O'Brien finally decided to begin with icon painting. Instead of using some idiom of contemporary art or train in the style of Rembrandt, he adopted a traditional way of making religious images. That is in many ways the antithesis of modern art, but also Western post-Renaissance art. The icon disciplines the artist, making his subjectivity disappear under the rules and logic of the sacred. O'Brien painted mostly icon images for 7 years, but he was not part of an Eastern Orthodox tradition. During the period that he worked mostly with icons, O'Brien wrote a small book that is still unpublished, at least in book form, in which he laid out his approach to sacred art. A vocation is more than an occupation. It is a summons and a response, a departure from what is familiar, an entry into the unknown, where one's understanding of himself is shaken and all that he is will be challenged. It initiates a period of growth and radical change in values and perspectives. To choose to respond to this call is to choose disintegration and reintegration, is to undergo fear, pain, and confusion in order that a new vision and certainty may emerge. It is ultimately to die and to be reborn. This is art as a religious vocation, with a focus on the transformative power of the cross. A demanding job description by all accounts. Here is an example of O'Brien's iconographic style. It's a Christ painting that looks like a portrait, but is not. To understand this more fully, we need to see the painting in its proper context and also see the whole image and the accompanying image. This painting of Jesus hanged in O'Brien's living room when I visited his house in 2011 in Combermere, Canada. It is of the Sacred Heart, and the accompanying picture is of the Immaculate Heart of Mary. They constitute, together with a crucifix and a statue of St. Joseph holding the child Jesus, the focal points of the prayer corner in the O'Brien home. It was here that he and his wife prayed, and in the present home the painting fulfills the same function. Michael O'Brien has prayed almost every day in front of this picture for years. It's a painting made by him, but it's also a vehicle for his relationship with God, and more precisely under the aspect of the Sacred Heart. The important point here is that this is an image made for practice, in this case religious, not merely for aesthetic appreciation. Here is another example of O'Brien's liturgical devotional art. There is an intense emotional tone in the painting. The figures of the Apostle John and of Mary, the mother of Jesus, stand as representatives of all men and women in front of the dying man-God. From his side flows his life, which is also grace in the form of blood, which John collects in a bowl as a reference to the Eucharist. In these two paintings, we instead get a glimpse of the process behind the creation of sacred art. The focus is not on devotion, but on inspiration. To the left is a painting of St. Luke, the patron saint of painters, holding an icon in the form of a scroll depicting Virgin Mary and the child Jesus. According to tradition, St. Luke made a painting of Mary, but it can also be interpreted as that his Gospel provides a portrait of Mary, thus the scroll. Around the icon is the studio of the painter. A swift swallow bearing spiritual inspiration rushes in from the left. To the right is a representation of the artist painting a similar painting as St. Luke. These two paintings show how O'Brien stayed close to the formal language of the icon, but began to move away from its strict rules, and instead he adopted a more flowing, symbolical, expressionist style suffused with a strong interiority. This is one of O'Brien's most successful pieces of sacred art that combines the symbolical clarity of the icon with the flowing forms of interior expressiveness. In this O'Brien painting, the language of the icon has been left behind. There are no strict iconographic rules, no discernible religious imagery. But we already know that the swallow is a creature carrying spiritual significance, perhaps a figure for the Holy Spirit. And there is this circular motion once again, which is reflected in the sun shining through a gap in the clouds. And classically, the circle is a sign of eternal perfection. This is a variant on the former image, now with a woman holding a child, while a man is taking care of the rudder. But if we return for a moment and look carefully at the previous painting, we see that there are two figures in the boat there also. The boat is on a stormy ocean with high, sharp, threatening waves. Is it the Madonna with baby Jesus? What is the symbolical meaning? It is hard to know. We must lean on the general human feeling of helplessness in front of nature, of trying to steer through the storm, of protecting the defenseless. But we have here left the communal nature of ritual and devotional religious symbols. Still, it is stylized, not realistic. It is symbolic, but in a suggestive way, with strong primary colors of blue, red, and milder variants of green, but no yellow colors. Michael O'Brien has been working with different styles in his paintings. They range from liturgical devotional pictures according to recognizable Christian symbolism to combinations of expressionist and personal symbolical language. The danger or promise, depending upon one's interest and institutional belonging, is that the language becomes private and close to the ineffable instead of using the conventional language of Christian sacred symbolism. There is thus in O'Brien's paintings a tension between public liturgical Christianity and personal interior spirituality. And this is a tension which is not resolved. The red thread of O'Brien's art is that of a visionary with a prayer life full of inspirations and interior revelatory images, but also with a strong sense of marginalization and suffering. There is little of triumphant Christianity in O'Brien's images. They seldom include many people functioning in social interaction. It is the individual and his or her interior spiritual life that is in focus. This is also important in O'Brien's novels, in which detachment from social life, the individual torn away from his natural surroundings and home, is central. The main character is often a person trying to find his way back to the sacred, but who comes up against the institutions of late modern society. Are there traces in O'Brien's art of the idea that the sacred once again will be the integrating supersystem that is a vision of a new Christendom? Maybe, but it's not in the foreground. The focus is on the present apocalyptic fragility of sincere Christian life and a turn toward interior spirituality. But the question is if it's possible to rebuild the social, ritual, and communal aspects of the sacred from it. The message is of personal authenticity and sincerity. But how does one build a Christian social reality from it? O'Brien's answer seems to be eschatological. Only God can rebuild it at a fitting time,